Oh, this is so nice for my cold, cold fingers. You know what's also been defrosting? My reading slump. I have been crazy the past month. For some reason, I read 10 books in the past month. That's genuinely almost a third of all the books that I read this year. Something happened when I went on my trip to Edinburgh. There's something about going on a trip alone that just makes me read so much because you're spending so much time just alone in restaurants and in cafes. I end up reading so much more than when I'm home alone. I'm one of those people that for some reason just finds it easier to read when I'm in a cafe or there are other people around or there's some kind of background noise going on. And of course you're alone, so you just have a lot of time also to read. And that sparked something in my brain. Like I read 5 books on that 3-week trip, and the high I got from just finishing a book or 2 every week. When I came back home, I kept chasing that high. And ever since, I've just been garbling up books. And one of the things that also really helps me get back into reading and read a lot is nonfiction, because if it's something that I find really interesting, a topic that really gets me thinking, I just want to get more and more of it, you know? We are definitely going to be talking about fiction as well. For example, I finally read Carmilla, which has been recommended to me by you guys for so many years. And I even read The Lord of the Rings. The tea of the day is my newest obsession, and it is a Rooibos vanilla latte. Rooibos tea, which has that like warm undertone, and vanilla syrup, they go together so well. And then I like to turn it into a latte to make it extra kind of creamy and warm. And this is gonna get me through the cold winter days. Ooh, I love doing a little clickety clack with my rings. ASMR. Tea and book ASMR. So I have been reading most of these books in little cafes in Edinburgh. You know, just reading a little book after I finish my work in a little coffee shop. And when I connect to a public Wi-Fi there, I would like my data to stay safe. That is why I use Surfshark VPN, the sponsor of today's video. When I connect to the internet via a VPN, my data is encrypted, blurred, so to say. And my online activity will be hidden to sneaky trackers. Wouldn't want to leak the topic of my next video, or, you know, all my personal data. Another thing that I ran into when I was in Scotland is that I couldn't watch some of my comfort shows because they weren't available in the UK, while they were available in the Netherlands. And then I could use my VPN to connect to a server back in the Netherlands so I could still access my favorite shows on streaming sites. Surfshark VPN allows you to connect to a server in a different country, unlocking all the movies and shows that are available for streaming there. And with Surfshark, you can use one account for an unlimited amount of devices. So you can protect your laptop and your phone and your cat's phone. They offer worldwide service, so you can always find something that you need. And if you also want to protect your devices against viruses that are lurking everywhere on the internet, Surfshark also has a great antivirus. Go to surfshark.com/thebookleo or use my code thebookleo at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. But yeah, let's just start at the beginning. The first book that I finished while I was still in Edinburgh, I listened to the audiobook for Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. David Graeber is an anthropologist. He first wrote an essay about this, about jobs where people don't really do anything. They don't really actually give any value back to society. Jobs where the person doing the job truly believes that they are not actually adding anything to society. This could either be people who spend a lot of their time on the job pretending to work, pretending that they're filling out forms and sheets when really they don't really have much to do, or it could be people who feel like they spend a lot of time just on paperwork, administration, getting permission for things, but in the grand scheme of things, doesn't actually add anything to society. And that essay got so many responses, so many people mailing to David Graeber saying, I relate to this, that he ended up writing an entire book chronicling like all these experiences that people have, telling their stories, and then also giving his own societal critique, his own theories on why he believes that this phenomenon happens. You could say it's any job where the person doing the job believes that it's bullshit and believes that it doesn't add anything to society, and if the position disappeared, it wouldn't make any difference. I personally think that this concept of it wouldn't make any difference is very subjective. Some people believe that writers or artists contribute nothing to society, but David Graeber gives the example of like, even, you know, if all artists and all writers would disappear from the earth, yeah, some people would think like, oh, you know, that doesn't matter, but there are definitely going to be people like me who would be very, very sad. So some examples of bullshit jobs that he gives are people whose only job is to be like a receptionist or someone who stands at the door, not really doing anything, but the only point that they are there is to make the company seem legit. Like the job doesn't actually need to exist because there is need for a receptionist or someone to open the door. The job only exists to make the people in power, the people leading the company, seem more legit, seem more luxurious. He also mentions people like telemarketers or public relations specialists, where their only job is to like sell you things that you don't need. People who write endless assessments and reports, talk about who is present, who is not present, like people who do kind of like endless bureaucratic jobs. And again, although I agree that I think that may be a little bit redundant, I think there are definitely people out there who do believe that that is important. Like, even though I think it's stupid if you have a receptionist that doesn't do anything just so your company looks cooler, I think that's a little bullshit. But I'm sure the people at the company don't think that that's bullshit. So that's why I feel like this definition of bullshit jobs is a little weird, it's a little loose. This, of course, doesn't take away the fact that it is, I do think, kind of a problem that there are so many people doing jobs that they themselves, I think it was about 1/3 of the people that he interviewed do a job that they personally believe shouldn't exist. I really enjoyed listening to this book. The way David Graeber writes is very readable, which I heard is also like his personal belief that any nonfiction book that you write needs to be readable and understandable, even for people who don't know anything about the field. One of the things that has stuck with me the most, that I really agree with, is that we believe that it is better for people to do a job that doesn't actually do anything than for people to have free time. Like, we value just the idea that you're working hard, even if it's on something that truly is meaningless. We value that more than just giving people free time. Kind of crazy. He says we see pain as the only justification for enjoying life and consumerism. Very relevant book, highly recommend, super easy to listen to the audiobook. Then I took it upon myself to finally tackle the Lord of the Rings books, and I read The Fellowship of the Ring. I love the movies, but I've always been super intimidated by the books, especially because everyone is always like, they're so hard to get through, but it's really worth it though, but they're really hard to get through. So yeah, consider me intimidated. I am filming a full vlog with my full in-depth thoughts on every single 3 of the books of the trilogy. That's gonna be like fully going into spoilers, going into the story, but I'll give a quick spoiler-free review of the book here, even though I don't think the plot of Lord of the Rings really is a spoiler anymore. Spoiler alert, the ring is bad. I loved The Fellowship of the Ring. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It starts out almost like a cozy fantasy, like you're just chilling with the hobbits for 20 plus years. It's great. I also just want to have dinner parties every day, do some harmless gossiping, and have a cute little home in a little dome. I love that. And you know, that is the power of the entire book. It's just the entire book is so filled with vibes and fantasy, and I truly feel like I am there in Middle Earth. Now, for those wondering, is it intimidating? Personally, I thought it was kind of okay, probably because I had such expectations that it was going to be hard to get through. It turned out pretty alright. Yes, Tolkien likes to kind of meander on details, but again, to me, that was the fun part of the book. I love reading about what everything looks like. I love reading about the lore. That's mostly it. This book is very lore dense. If I were to critique this with like a 21st century perspective, I would say this book is incredibly heavy on the info dumping. It does a lot of telling instead of showing. It breaks a lot of quote-unquote writing rules. I think the way that we write fantasy today is way more focused on, okay, how can we avoid the info dump? How can we immerse the reader into this world without just throwing endless swaths of information at them? But given that this was like the blueprint for epic Western fantasy as we know it today, I'm not surprised that, we didn't have those techniques yet. We didn't really think about that yet. So yeah, you're gonna deal with lots of info dumps, lots of lore, lots of different place names. Oh my gosh, there's so many place names. It gets a little confusing, but again, to me, that was genuinely the fun part of this book. That every single thing that you read, every new thing that you learn about this world, you realize, oh, there's way more lore there, and there's way more to learn about these elves, and there's way more to learn about these underground dwarf caves, and there's way more to learn about these hobbits and these wizards. Sometimes when you read a fantasy book, it feels like the world starts and stops with where the main characters are. Lord of the Rings, Middle-earth, truly, everything about this book makes you feel like this is an entire world and I am just dipping my toe in it. Don't skip the songs. They are relevant. But more in-depth thoughts on this book and the next two books that I haven't read yet will come in like a cozy, in-depth Lord of the Rings reading vlog. So subscribe if you don't want to miss that. Ooh, there's two books that I kind of want to talk about in tandem. So I wanted to learn more about artificial intelligence and AI with the rise of ChatGPT and talk about generative AI and the ethics of it, and also just AI in general and technology. It's everywhere. I feel like every product nowadays is coming out with like an AI feature. And I thought if I want to join the conversation about this, I need to understand how it works. I saw someone on the internet say that AI fans don't know how to look at art, but artists don't know how AI works. And that's where the conversation tends to go awry. So I took it upon myself to learn more about it. And I read two AI related books. I read How AI Thinks, which is just a general introduction into how computers actually work, because I didn't know how AI actually works, what it does. This is a very positive about AI book. And then I also read Laura Bates's The New Age of Sexism, about all the ways in which women specifically are hurt by current AI technology innovation. And I thought it would be interesting to compare the two. Let's start with this one. I really enjoyed reading this for the simple fact that I finally now feel like I understand a little bit how AI technology actually works, how chips works, how transistors in computers work. I think often when we talk about AI, when we criticize AI, we tend to talk about large language models and chatbots like ChatGPT, but that is just one side of AI. AI is just anything generally uses large data sets to make predictive models, to predict outcomes. And this can be used for many different things. Like, for example, 4 years ago, before ChatGPT was even a thing, while I was finishing up my master's in neurobiology, a lot of neurobiological research uses AI to make predictive models on health outcomes or genetic information, gene expression. A lot of statistical models use machine learning, which is a form of AI, and we use that to do medical research, which I would say is a good thing. He mentions a lot of things where AI can be used for good, like making climate models from when we're researching climate change, predicting the weather for your weather app. Disease diagnosis in hospitals benefits a lot from AI, helping people to get a diagnosis for a disease earlier, which makes it easier to heal them still. But throughout this entire book, I was like, okay, when is he gonna talk about the problems? Is he ever gonna mention the downsides? Now, there is an entire chapter dedicated to the problems that can arise with AI, all the standard stuff like the environmental impacts, how these data sets tend to reflect bias that humans have, like racism and sexism. Neither of these two books go into the ethics of where the data comes from and how a lot of generative AI is trained on stolen writing and art. So if you have any recommendations for books that do go into that, let me know. He does go into the problems, but I personally found that he's a little uncritical of them because he kind of shoves it all away by saying like, oh, well, we just need good regulation. If we just do good regulation and good safety testing, it should all be fine. But then he never really takes the next step to think about, okay, but how do we implement that, and why is it that so many AI companies currently are not really sticking to safety regulations, are not really doing proper safety testing? Because that, we're going to switch over to Laura Bates' novel, is what she talks a lot about in this book. So she goes over, my gosh, I've made so many notes on this. I can't talk about it all. We would be here forever. She talks about all the ways that AI is used to hurt women, like deepfake porn, how women are harassed in the metaverse and in virtual reality spaces, and there's just no regulation whatsoever for it. She talks about sex robots. She talks about cyber brothels, which are online in the metaverse, in virtual reality brothels with sex robots, and how horribly they usually are treated. She talks about online harassment and how this is often not taken seriously. The rise of like AI girlfriends and chatbot girlfriends, and how they're often marketed as like, this is better than a real woman because she won't nag and she won't be annoying to you. And she also really goes into the bias that exists in these AIs because of the biased data sets that go into it. So how it leads to racism and sexism. The main takeaway that I got from this book is that the problem is that there are no good safety regulations. That the reasons that all these things happen is of course not because the AI itself is like evil, but because people, humans, men, are using these AI or virtual reality tools to hurt women. You know, it's a tool that they use in a bad way. And the reason that it keeps happening is because there are no good safety regulations. And every time that these companies are asked to take responsibility for the way that women are hurt, they say like, oh, you know, it's just too much work to do all the safety regulation before putting out the product. And then they usually only do these safety regulations and then research into it after the product is already out, after harassment claims have come in. Only then will they go to start and look like, oh, how can we stop this? Instead of looking at that while creating the product. Laura Bates describes this as women are seen as collateral damage to these companies, where it's not something to prioritize as we're making the product, but it's just something that, you know, once it goes wrong, then we'll take a look at it. It's just collateral damage, but the main focus is to just put it out as fast as possible so we can innovate and grow and be faster than other people. So although in this book, Nigel Toon is like, oh, we just need to regulate better, we just need to put in safety regulations, Laura Bates very clearly shows that because we live in a sexist society, those safety measures are simply not taken because innovation is seen as more important than the safety of women. And also, I find that the author kind of contradicts himself, because the last chapter is about the importance of leadership in AI and how we need to make sure that we innovate and that we keep innovating so that we won't become dependent on other countries to give us that technology, but that we need to be quick to be like the first to innovate. He literally says, right after the chapter where he's like, we need to regulate, we need to have safety measures, he says, we must ensure that we do not get tied up with inappropriate regulation and as a result end up falling behind. And I think this word inappropriate in the inappropriate regulations is the key word here, because the question is, what do we consider inappropriate? Laura Bates' book very clearly shows that women's safety is not seen as a priority. These AI companies believe that there needs to be some kind of balance between safety and regulation, but also growth and making sure we don't fall behind. The question is, who gets left behind when we talk about appropriate safety testing to not compromise growth? It's marginalized people. There is, however, one thing that both of these books agreed on, and that is the idea that AI is a neutral tool. AI is not inherently evil or good. It is a neutral tool that is used by humans, that is coded by humans, so humans have the responsibility to make sure that it's not used for bad things. Laura Bates also talks about all the positive ways in which AI can be used, like I already said, in medicine or in climate models. And she thinks that it is our responsibility to make sure that there are feminist ways to use AI, that there are feminists thinking about how can we create data sets that are not biased? How can we make sure that appropriate safety regulations are put in place? So yeah, both books really interesting in their own ways. This book taught me how AI actually works and how computer works. And then Laura Bates' books, I think, actually asks the critical questions that need to be asked. And then I just really couldn't stop reading nonfiction and books that just kind of boggled my mind. I read Tomorrow Sex Will Be Good Again by Catherine Angel. This is about women and desire in the age of consent. The reason I want to read this is because Rain Fisher Kwan recommended it, and I love her essays. And if she recommends it, then I must read it. I still don't know what I think about this book. Basically what this book does is it criticizes our modern feminist takes on consent. She chronicles like historically how the way we talk about consent has changed. You know, how it started with like men having the idea of like, if a woman says no, she actually means yes. And then we got the idea of no means no. You know, if a woman says no, then we need to believe that. And then that changed into yes means yes, because we started to realize that, wait, actually, a lot of times women freeze up in these kinds of situations. Women are afraid to say no, so they don't say anything, you know? So a lack of a no doesn't necessarily mean yes, and that's how we got to this whole like, oh, you need to have a confident yes. Yes means yes. And she takes even a step further, saying like, even that doesn't give us everything that we want from consent, because we are kind of, I still have a hard time summarizing exactly her take, but I think her take is that we are putting all the responsibility on women to always know what they want, and that is simply not the reality. Sometimes we don't know what we want. We don't yet know what we want to say yes to. We are putting women in this position where they need to be super outspoken about things that we also shame them for. Because if women are really outspoken about what they want and what they like, we tend to put them aside as like sluts, you know? Here she says, we place the unequal burden on women to manage the risks of sex. We treat male contempt of women's pleasure and autonomy as a brute fact, while treating women's maneuvering around it as an imperative. She says we shouldn't have to know ourselves in order to be safe from violence. That goes really hard. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not entirely sure how to solve this, but that is an astute observation. But then also a lot of this book is spent on critiquing research on sexual desire and research from sexologists, and that's where I sometimes started thinking like, I don't really agree. It is very clear that she is a philosopher and not a medical researcher. I felt like very often she misinterpreted the terminology that these researchers used. I felt like there was just some miscommunication going on in some places, but she does make really good points about how there tends to be a lot of research on women's desire, because we tend to believe that women don't actually know what they want, and we need to research them so we can find out what they really want, but they don't know. You know, they think that they don't want something, but their body shows that they do actually want it, and that kind of stuff. But generally, I think this is a really good nuancing of the conversation around consent. Like she says, women are urged to develop the capacity to say no, as well as the capacity to say a hearty yes, but they are not taught to say maybe. Who knows why we do what we do? Who knows why we want what we want? And also, very importantly, I don't believe that consent miraculously displaces the imbalance of power that operate in our every interaction. And that I find very interesting, because I think a lot of modern conversations about consent, me included, tend to see consent as some kind of magical, miraculous thing that suddenly makes everything okay. And that maybe we should think a little bit more about what kind of power imbalances still lie behind the consent that is given. Interesting read. Next, I finally read Carmilla, the dark sapphic romance that inspired Dracula. I've been looking forward to reading this book for so long, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm a little like, I don't know. I think I really expected, you know, a beautiful gothic tale with gorgeous writing, and that just isn't what this is. Yes, it's gothic. It takes place in a castle. We have our main character, Laura, and her family takes in this young girl, Carmilla, to take care of her, but things get increasingly weird. There's a lot of tension between Carmilla and Laura. Like, Carmilla is basically immediately like, oh my god, please stay with me forever, I love you, like, you're the best person ever. And then Laura's like, oh, I don't know what I'm feeling for her. So the setup is very gothic, it's very vampiric. There's castles, there's gothic chapels, but the writing style is very dialogue heavy. It's very simple. A lot of the characters constantly say things that are very on the nose. I thought there was going to be like a lot of yearning, you know, a lot of sapphic yearning, but Carmilla is just basically like, I love you, please stay with me forever, you're so special to me, immediately. So I think I just had the wrong expectation going into this book. I just hoped it would be more atmospheric, but the way it's written is just very to the point. It is very clearly a religious warning tale about vampires and sin. And I did enjoy it. The story of these characters trying to figure out who the vampire is and how to stop them is genuinely cool and interesting. I just wanted more longing and more vibes. I ended up giving it 3 stars. The final 2 books are also non-fiction books that I listened to the audiobook for, that I also think are interesting to talk about together. It is This is Fascism. Very clear title, and The Game of the Populist. These are 2 books about how to recognize fascism and rising populism. They are in Dutch, but I do still think that the messages that I got from this book are interesting to talk about. Let me just go over some of the things that they both mention as things to recognize and kind of untrustworthy politicians. They create a really strong, like, us versus them story. They tend to really focus on like the city elite versus the hardworking rural people. And very importantly, they slowly chip away at democracy. They usually rise to power via democracy, usually because of more mild or like center right-wing parties shifting towards these more like extreme right parties and kind of taking over their opinions, normalizing their opinions in the hopes of, you know, like getting votes themselves. But what really ends up happening is they normalize the extreme opinions of extreme right parties. Throughout history, like both of these books mentioned this, you can see so many examples of like extremely right-wing fascist governments being chosen democratically because mild right-wing parties normalize their opinions by taking them on, hoping to get, you know, their own votes. But what they're really doing is they're making these extreme parties seem more normal. Things that are happening almost every day in the US and in a bunch of European countries as well would have seemed crazy and out there a few years ago, but we're already getting used to it. Wow, this is really not a happy topic to talk about. I'm sorry to hit you with this. I know you're probably just trying to do your laundry right now. Maybe you're cooking, eating your breakfast. A happy topic. But yeah, my big takeaway, especially from this book, This is Fascism, is that we need to recognize it when it's happening and call it what it is, so we can recognize it and make sure we don't normalize it or like accidentally get used to it. Okay, very happy ending to this video. So yeah, I've been reading a ton. I'm like so excited. I'm so in the reading mood again. I love it. It rarely happens that there's only a month between two of my reading wrap-ups, but that's just because I've just been reading so much. I had to film one again. I can't wait to continue this reading frenzy into the winter and the Christmas break. Like, So yeah, it turns out all I needed to get out of my months long reading slump was a bunch of nonfiction books that just like sparked something in my brain, and also just reading a few books really fast, so that now I am kind of addicted to the high of finishing books fast. I mean, you guys know that I never believe that reading as much as possible is ever the most important thing, but I am mostly just happy that I'm finally getting to all of these books that I really want to read. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this little chat. I really hope you enjoyed this little video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon in another video very soon. Goodbye!